Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and today I'm going to show you how I made this super simple linen tower cabinet that could also be used for other things, not just linens. So if you're ready to see how it came together, let's get building. For whatever reason, I've been obsessed lately with tall, skinny cabinet designs. Nothing fancy, just some simple storage cabinets. I've built a few before, but they were all on a larger scale, and while I had a break between some bigger projects that I'm working on, I thought that this smaller version would be a fun build that I could enjoy making for myself. Plus, I've had this cane webbing in a drawer in my shop for well over a year, just waiting for a project to use it on. So clearly, this seemed like the perfect project to tackle this week. I've partnered with my friends at Kreg to provide the building plans for free if you'd like to build one too, and I'll leave the link to the plans in the description as well as the details on the tools and materials used in this project. Okay, now let's get building. If you've seen many of my other projects or videos, you probably noticed that I use a lot of plywood. Since this was a fairly small project, I was able to utilize several of my scraps. However, if you don't have a shop full of scraps, I've provided a cut diagram in the plans linked below for how to cut these pieces from a full sheet. I used my circular saw and rip cut to cut down some strips from a leftover piece of plywood here that I will use for the main body of the cabinet. Then I cut them down to length on the miter saw. I cut 2 long side panels, 2 small middle panels, and 2 scrap plywood strips to build the cabinet carcass. Before assembling anything though, I applied iron-on edge banding to the front edge of the sides and middle panels, as these edges will be exposed in the finished project. Edge banding is always an optional step, but it does look a little cleaner, so I just like to add it. If you've never used edge banding before, I have a detailed step-by-step guide for how to apply it that I will link below as well. Once the edge banding was on and the pieces were sanded smooth, I brought out my Kreg 720 pocket hole jig to drill pocket holes to assemble the cabinet. I drilled holes along the edges of the 2 middle panels and into the ends of the 2 plywood strips as well. Then I assembled the cabinet carcass using pocket hole screws. You can use glue here as well if you want, I just skipped it. I put the thin strips at the top and the solid panels at the bottom, and just a note here, you could use a solid piece for the top as well, but I was just saving on wood. I installed my second middle panel 7.5 inches up from the bottom. I just used a scrap block here to help me with my spacing. Once the cabinet was together, I went ahead and used my shelf pin jig to drill shelf pin holes along the cabinet sides to install the adjustable shelves later. Then I cut a 1/4 inch plywood panel to fit over the back and stapled it in place. Now that the body of the cabinet was together, it was time to dress it up a little bit. I trimmed out the side panels with 1x3 boards just to add some detail. You can certainly buy your own 1x3s, but I prefer to cut mine from 1x6s, so I ripped my 1x3s down on the table saw and then cut them to fit the sides of the cabinet. I was wanting to avoid nail holes and just use glue for this, so I applied some glue and clamped the piece onto the front first. I wanted these pieces to hang over the front edge 3/4 of an inch so that the door would sit inside this section and it would be flush across the front. I used a scrap piece of wood to get this piece positioned correctly and clamped in place. Then I decided that waiting for glue to dry was not how I wanted to spend my day, and decided to just go ahead and nail in the rest of the pieces. I did this on both sides, and then I added one more piece at the top on the front as well. Next, I cut the 1x3 pieces to make the door frame. I test fit them together just to make sure that they would fit okay, and then I drilled pocket holes to assemble it together. I used wood glue and pocket hole screws to assemble the door frame, and once it was together, I pulled out some pocket hole plugs. You don't have to do this step, but I wanted to hide the holes, so I used some wood glue to glue the plugs into the holes and set it aside to dry. If you'd like some other ideas for how to plug pocket holes, I have a detailed list that I will link below of 4 ways to plug pocket holes. While that was drying, I moved on to building the drawer and attaching the top. For this, I ventured back to my scrap wood pile and found some pieces that I could cut down for the sides of the drawer box and for the top of the cabinet. Once I had all these pieces cut down to size, I applied edge banding to the tops of the drawer box and around the sides of the top panel. Again, this is optional, I just think it looks cleaner. I centered the top panel in place and used wood screws to the top supports to secure it. Then I went back to the drawer box. Now, this is a tiny drawer, and I felt that using regular drawer slides was a little bit overkill here, so I literally just made this a box that slides into the cubby. Of course, if you prefer, you can definitely add slides. That said, since this is such a small drawer, instead of using my typical dados and pocket holes, I just used wood glue and brad nails to assemble the box. Then I cut and stapled a 1/4 inch plywood panel onto the bottom. You can build your drawer boxes however you prefer, but whatever you do, just leave a little wiggle room on the sides to slide it in and out. You have got to be kidding me. I wanted this box to have a tight fit, but I made it a little too tight and ended up having to scrap this and remake it a 1/4 inch narrower. Live and learn. By the time that I got the drawer finally complete, the glue had dried on the plugs on the door, so I gave it a good sanding and used my concealed hinge jig to drill cup holes for full overlay hinges for frameless cabinets. I screwed the hinges in place on the door and then installed it onto the cabinet. I removed the door later to install the cane panel, but for now, I just moved on to the final details of the build. I cut to fit crown molding along the top of the cabinet. I was at the mercy of whatever the lumberyard happened to have that wasn't already primed, so I ended up with this poplar trim. It's a little darker than the rest of the cabinet, but it is what it is. Once the pieces were cut, I just nailed them in place and then cut 1x3s for the drawer front. I need to add the drawer front, and I don't really want nail holes right here in the front where you're gonna be noticing them. So I think I'm just going to stick this up here and just measure how far down on the drawer it needs to be. Looks like 1 inch and 7/8. So I'm just gonna pull this drawer out and glue these on the front, and then hope that when I get ready to put this back in here, everything lines up. I got these pieces glued on and it worked fine, but in hindsight, it would have been much easier to just pocket hole join the frame together just like I did with the door frame and glue it in place as one piece. Honestly, I'm not really sure what I was thinking here, but it worked, and I moved on to the final piece of the cabinet, the base. I built the cabinet base from 2x2s and used pocket holes and screws to assemble it. I made this so that it fit the exact size of the bottom of the cabinet. Then I screwed it in from the bottom side. I had a hard time deciding how I wanted to finish this piece, so I went ahead and puttied and sanded it while I decided. Then, after lots of careful thought, I decided to go ahead and paint this base black and leave the top natural. Before I painted, I removed the door from the hinges so that between coats of paint I could install the cane panel. There are a lot of different ways to attach this cane, and I tested out a few different methods on some test pieces before deciding to just keep it really simple here and use staples. I centered the cane over the door opening and trimmed it down with scissors so that there was about 1 inch overhang on each side. Then I used staples to secure it, slowly working my way down and pulling as tight as I can. Once the cane was secure, I used some thin scrap strips, or you could also use like some lattice trim strips to just cover the edges to help protect it from unraveling and just trim it out. I just stapled these in place, making sure not to place them where they will interfere with the hinges. Now, there's a lot of technicalities about installing cane on furniture. Most of the time when you're installing cane, it's as like a seat or as a back support, and it's going to be supporting a lot of weight or things like pushing against it. This is literally decorative and just is there to hide what's behind the door. So I wasn't super concerned that it was super nice and tight and whatever. However, there are some waves to the door. I didn't get it pulled super tight just by hand pulling it, so it is what it is. It's a door, like it's a door. But one piece of advice that I have, if I were to do this over again, or if you want to try it a different way, is that you could soak the cane in water, like 30 minutes to an hour, a couple hours if you wanted, whatever. Attach it while it's wet, pull it as tight as you can, and then as it dries, it will shrink and it will pull itself tighter. So it might have helped with some of these waves here. Again, it's just a door, but if you wanted to, that's something that you could do. Once the paint was dry on the base, I installed the door back in place, gave the cabinet a few coats of clear poly, added some handles, and finally a couple of plywood shelves to fit inside. And it was finished. If you wanted to add a small stop block to the piece above the drawer, you could definitely do that, but I just left it as is. This simple cabinet will be great for a small bathroom, for a little extra towel storage, or you could use it in an entryway to keep dog leashes or gloves or whatever. Honestly, I'm still deciding how I want to use it. I just built it first and I'll find a place for it later. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this project as much as I enjoyed making it, and if you'd like to make your own, don't forget to check out the free plans that I've linked below. If you aren't already subscribed, I'd love if you go ahead and join along so that you don't miss out on what's coming next. Until next time, friends, happy building.